gentlemen, the first toast of the evening is the worshipful company of Haberdashers, the school governors and the school, in the capable of hands of Mr. Frank Hanbidge, which I'm sure many people here know. Frank, I have to say, my brother would have been here, but he's in Dubai, but he sends his best wishes to you, and you taught him in 1971 when you first joined the school. I won't tell you what he said, but I'll leave you to expand on that. Right, Mr. Frank Hanbidge.
Thank you. Well, it's my privilege to give this wonderful tripartite toast. It's an intriguing order of priorities here, isn't it? But first of all, Mr. Chairman and gentlemen, I must thank Andrew Tarpey for his splendid organisation of this wonderful dinner tonight. And thank the Worshipful Company of Haberdashers for the use of this wonderful venue. Well, I understand that this first speaking slot at the association dinner has a twofold purpose: to relate to the association news of the school and to be a warm-up act for the distinguished guest speaker. Now, as to the first, I'm not in a good position to bring much news of school, for though I visit regularly, indeed I will do so every day next week, my purpose in going there is to invigilate exams, and the exam hall is not a great place for lively social gossip. I have only two items of Elstree news. The first is sad: the tragic death in February of Simon Boys, long-serving second master and a true gentleman, a cruelly early death. The second item, though a loss to the school, has, I hope, a cheerful aspect to the individual it concerns. I refer to the prospective retirement of Philip Parr, my distinguished successor as head of Sixth. We wish him a happy, well-deserved retirement, and I welcome him to the thrill-packed world of the exam hall. Now, as to being a warm-up act, it was the late Michael Fitch who first taught me about the way high-class professional mistresses in 19th century Paris used a repousseuse as a companion. When the lovely demi-mondaine found themselves temporarily without an aristocratic protector, they would go riding in the Bois de Boulogne as it were to display their wares, for no costume is more flattering to the female form than a riding habit. I think girls catch on to this quite early, and that is why your teenage daughters get fixated on Pony Club, I'm sure. Anyway, they would take with them riding a lady's maid who was specially selected for her repulsive appearance, known as the repousseuse, by contrast with whom the belle might seem all the lovelier. When I'm in the Habs coach park and I see pairs of girls arm in arm, I wonder whether some wholly innocent and entirely unconscious vestige of the practice lives on. Perhaps really it's more an instinct than a practice, perhaps. The advantage to the pretty girl is self-evident, but there are advantages to the plain girl too. For example, she's included in invitations to all the best parties. Thus it is that although I am in this pair of speakers with Rob Nothman, the plain girl, I feel no resentment in serving that glamorous dish here in this humble role of contrasting oratorical incompetent, for thereby I have secured my ticket to this, the best party in town. Mr. President, you and I can claim only honorary membership of this association and this company, for we were educated elsewhere and merely earned our humble crust as its agent or servant, as our old employment contracts quaintly put it. We are indeed connected to the great house of association and company, but we are distinctly below stairs. In Downton Abbey terms, where Mike Jeans might take the part of Lord Grantham, pin-up boy of Saga magazine, and
I'll turn this off.
Andrew Tarpey might take the part of the heir apparent Matthew Crawley. He's darling of girls' comic Bunty. Then the headmaster might serve as Carson the butler. He is Green Bay's door poster boy for the periodical Progressive Butler. Mr. President, there must be some wartime emergency with young Master Tarpey Crawley away at the front to explain your temporary elevation upstairs to medallion-wearing rank. Myself I cast as Thomas, the thieving footman, branded Cheat of the Year in the professional paper to which I myself subscribe, Invigilator's World. A paper that is shortly to serve as guest publication in the redacted headlines game on Have I Got News for You? Now, there is a particular reason for this inglorious self-casting, and this cues my first true story. The fact is that about 30 years ago at Habs, word got about that, falsely as I shall explain, but understandably, that I was guilty of a theft, and a theft of a particularly shocking nature. The occasion was the school carol service, then in one of its early years at St Albans. By way of background, you need to know that my wife and I had recently bought a house in Finchley, and we'd inherited in it a small maintenance problem, which I thought it was in my DIY capabilities to fix. So, just before noon on that school-free Monday morning of the carol service, wearing my best dark suit, I called in at a wonderful hardware shop at Tally-Ho Corner. Does anyone remember W.R. Harvey? I think there was a branch in Radlett too, a wonderful, wonderful shop. When Mr. Harvey retired, replacing him required the local construction of 4 DIY megastores. You would go up to the counter where Mr. Harvey benignly presided in his smart brown shop coat, and you'd ask for, say, a 2-inch floorboard nail. 1, sir? Certainly, sir. If I might advise, sir, that since the regrettable withdrawal of the halfpenny coin, I'm forced to charge you the full penny. So if I might suggest that you buy 2, it'll cost no more, and there's always the risk that in hammering one in, you might bend it, necessitating a second visit. In such seemly wise was commerce conducted in the suburbs in that better age. Now, on that carol service day, I left Mr. Harvey's not with flooring nails, but with a different requisite, costing 5 pence. You could buy cheaper, sir, but I always recommend quality. I pocketed my purchase and proceeded to St Albans in the untrustworthy Triumph Dolomite, recently assembled at Longridge by Red Robbo and his pals. At the Abbey, in the vain glory of gown and hood, we masters progressed down the aisle 2 by 2, not so much an ark, but a Titanic of faith. I was unaware that in the Gothic gloom of that Norman pile, once a Benedictine monastery, a fact that has a peripheral relevance to my tale, dark forces had prepared for me a sinister mate, an iceberg of destruction, and launched it upon a coincident bearing. We masters took our places at the ends of the rows, 2 seats each side of the aisle having been left vacant for us. We heard tuneful carols, an excellent sermon from Chaplain Lindsay on the importance of generous giving at Christmas, and at last the collection hymn was announced, "O come all ye donors." I wonder whether you've ever heard such a sentiment expressed in this room. Now, it was then that my iceberg hove into view. I confess I did not recognise the threat that it posed. My iceberg was the collection plate, and it really was a plate, Anglican offertory practice allows the use of either a discreet two-handled purse, where your gift drops out of sight into the bag, or a large open plate, where your gift and those of your fellow congregants lie exposed to public scrutiny. Human nature being what it is, I'll wager that the open plate produces more revenue. A prefect in the aisle handed me the plate. Taking it with my left hand, with my right I reached into the trousers pocket where I keep my change, while I briefly appraised the givings of others. Highest in value was a £5 note. I presumed it must be the gift of the master of the Haberdashers Company. Perhaps he was making a thank offering for the fine free lunch he'd just enjoyed in Aldenham House, a sumptuous repast for which the school's catering department had already invoiced the bursar at a per-head cover charge of £12.54. Or perhaps the master had been striving to set a good example for others to follow. He had striven in vain. There was a sprinkling of silver, presumably from parents, for whom school fees are never easy. But there was a great mass of coppers, wrung from resentful boys, already wistfully mourning the loss of tomorrow's break-time curly-whirly. The boys shared Mr. Harvey's regret at the withdrawal of the halfpenny coin. In my pocket, I recognised by touch a disc the diameter and thickness of one of the then newfangled £1 coins. A gift appropriate to my status. Without looking at it first, I dropped it onto the plate. Gentlemen, there now lay on the plate a £5 note, a sprinkling of silver, a mass of copper, and a 3/4-inch black rubber bath tap washer. An unintended present from Mr. Harvey. The washer was made of hard rubber, and it was rather shiny. As it lay there momentarily before me, it caught the light. There was a word embossed on it. The word was a brand name, Mr. Harvey's recommended brand no less, but this word seemed to be making a sardonic comment on the moral value of my act of giving. The word was hold tight. What on earth could I do? I had the merest fraction of a second to decide. One edge of the plate was already being grasped by the colleague to my left. The Abbey authorities would be bound to see this washer as a gross insult. Habs might never be invited there again. On a sudden fatal impulse, I snatched back the washer. It was too late to replace it with a more suitable coin, but the plate was already passing away down the row. I glanced up into the face of my tall colleague, neighbouring beside me, wordlessly beseeching him for sympathy in my impossible situation. As fate would have it, that colleague was Michael McLaughlin, Meadows' housemaster, an able mathematician who had found his second vocation in teaching. His first vocation after Cambridge had been for 20 years as Brother Swithin, a Benedictine monk. He is a doctor of theology of Rome and a man of high, perhaps stern moral principle. I have never inquired over what point of doctrine, perhaps obscure, Michael abandoned his monastic vows, but I'm quite sure it could not possibly have been over his repugnance at the harshness of Holy Mother Church's attitude toward overt theft from holy places. Michael had discreetly averted his eyes from what I was giving, but he was clearly well aware of my sudden snatchback, for he visibly flinched and returned my glance sharply. I realized that to him there must be only two possible explanations. Either I had rashly made too generous a gift and had had second thoughts, or, seeing the rich pickings, I had simply fallen victim to a sudden fit of avarice. A reproachful frown passed over Michael's splendid open features, and it then hardened into a stony glare. Nor was Michael the only witness to my impulse. The story spread like wildfire, and all through that last week of term, pestering boys would ask, "How much did you get, sir?" Very bad boys were openly admiring, one confiding how every year he felt tempted but had never had the bottle. Good boys said nothing, they just passed by on the other side with a contemptuous sneer. The truth about Mr. Harvey's washer was scoffed at as laughably implausible. In the end, I managed to concoct an explanation which all but the most cynical believed. I said I'd been dared to do it in a bet with Stuart Moore. The deal was that if I took some paper money from the plate, then I'd buy Stuart a bottle of good wine with it, and he would donate double the value to the Abbey. Stuart kindly agreed to corroborate this falsehood, and the storm eventually passed. Let me move on a little bit here, I think. My next true story does not concern Habs directly, but it convinced me that it was time to retire. Mr. President, some years after my own retirement, when it came to be your turn, I was invited to the occasion of your farewell speech to the staff common room, and I well remember your giving it as your opinion that teaching was perhaps a young man's game, that to communicate properly, teachers and taught must, at least to some extent, be on the same wavelength and have the same assumptions. I agree, and this worries me about the proposed raising of the teacher's retirement age to 68. Mr. President, you know I spend part of my time in Oxford, where my wife has a pied-à-terre, and it was in Oxford that my story takes place. Late one night I was, as the euphemism has it, exercising our dog Millie in St. John Street, a stretch of tall classical houses which runs from Beaumont Street to the elegant surroundings of Wellington Square, where there is, for canine convenience, a precious patch of grass. But there was nothing elegant and certainly nothing precious about the appalling language Millie and I were about to overhear. A door burst open, and suddenly a youth and a maiden appeared in furious altercation. Be it understood, gentlemen, that I use the word maiden in the sense, how can I put this, in the sense that is least exacting. Certain key indicators about this pair, the restricted nature of their discourse, the poverty of their vocabulary, their deplorable inarticulacy and slovenly dress, clearly identified them as student members of the university. These are egalitarian times. The basis of their dispute appeared to be, as the maiden rather coarsely put it, "I knows you been with that Christine shagging her." The youth, thus accused, adopted as his initial argumentative posture frenzied denial, insistently crying out, "I ain't!" The maiden countered this with a repeated two-word phrase of her own, "You of!" And so they proceeded towards a crescendo of inharmonious counterpoint until the youth, sensing repeated denial did not convince, essayed a fresh gambit. Qualified concession appeared tactically necessary. "OK, then," he said in a dismissive tone, "so I shagged her." This prompted from the maiden a wail of, I knowed it. But I promise you," continued the youth with the assumption of an air of supreme dialectical and forensic skill, Millie and I, unnoticed, stood transfixed in frozen anticipation. What could possibly come next? Might it be the old line, "But it never meant a thing"? No, we had underestimated our man's ingenuity, and I think, you know, to his credit, that what he said next was probably true, and so limited was his understanding of the female heart that he offered it in a genuine spirit of conciliation, reassurance, and consolation. "But I really, truly promise you, I shags you more often than I shags her." Alas, for the youth's noble spirit waited compromise. The maiden fled in hysterical shrieks, while the youth remained, shouting after her as she disappeared into the dark, "Well, F off then." At last, noticing our immediately bystanding presence, the youth shrugged, and with an unpleasantly conspiratorial grin of complicit gender solidarity sighed, "Ha, women, eh?" Grave exception to this sexist remark was taken by poor Millie. The whole incident had left her too disturbed even to manage a wee. So, Mr. President, the concept of complete premarital chastity, followed by absolute fidelity, with which I grew up among the Plymouth Brethren, but which was pretty universally acknowledged in Britain in the 1950s, at least as an aspiration, has dwindled today into the entitlement of the very temporary maîtresse en titre to be favoured with a preponderant differential in frequency of shagging. Those lovely and ancient words, the deepest pledge of human love, and keep thee only unto her so long as ye both shall live, have decayed into their unlovely modern equivalent, babe, you is me top bitch. Now, when I was appointed head of sixth at Habs, the job description included the sentence, to assume general responsibility for the moral welfare of sixth formers and to guide their developing moral awareness. The pair in St. John Street were not haberdashers, but they were products of the same society, and many Habs boys aspired to this Oxford world. To be honest, I had seen unwelcome signs of St. John Street attitudes in the Habs Leavers Yearbook. I shared no assumptions with this world, and I began to realise that I could no longer play a same wavelength moral role in it. Social progress had left me behind, and it was time to go, which is a sentiment I must now apply to myself as speaker. You have suffered the repousseur too long. To change metaphor, this mouldy hors d'oeuvre must be cleared away in favour of the main dish of the evening. So I conclude by asking you to charge your glasses and rise to drink a toast. To the Worshipful Company of Haberdashers, the school governors and the school.
Governor's School.
And the bloke in St. John Street.
Well done.
I'm taking the mic down to the school captain, and I sort of say, well, follow that. I haven't got the mic there, but this is Mr. Luke Ilott, who is the school captain of the Haberdashers School.
Well, I have to say, Mr. Hanbidge left very soon after I arrived at Habs, and so certainly wasn't my head of sixth form. On many occasions, I probably wish he was. Mr. President, honoured guests, gentlemen, good evening. It's been a great privilege in my upper sixth year to attend all manner of dinners, events and meetings here in the fairly impressive surroundings of Haberdashers Hall. It is perhaps fitting that the last dinner I shall be attending before I leave school next week is this one, not least because it's been so enjoyable, and many thanks to our hosts and indeed to Mr. Hanbidge for that, but also because it is in many ways reassuring. Despite the indelible trauma bound to be left by my departure from Habs next Wednesday, I know that there will always be an association ready to welcome me with all the grown-up conversation, fine food, and of course copious amounts of port that made my school days so bearable. Now, when he was telling me about this dinner and the speech that I would be making, Mr. Corrall helpfully told me it would be on any subject I like, but that the words school and Habs should feature in there somewhere. Technically, I have just fulfilled that obligation, so I think I'll now bore you with all manner of nonsense. Namely, what I shall most miss, and indeed what I think many of you must miss, about Habs. I've never been the best sportsman around, but I think that some of my proudest moments at the school have been on the field of play. My main sport is rugby. I'm far too stupid for cricket and too weak for water polo or athletics. But in a school filled with intelligent, self-respecting young men who appreciate their corporeal integrity, there will always be space in rugby teams for those who don't mind continually having the life kicked out of them by enormous brutes. And even once those training sessions are over, The matches can get pretty gruesome too. You'll be happy to know that our traditional rivalry with Queen Elizabeth Boys' School and with Merchant Taylors continues, and more importantly, of course, even more happy that we beat both of them this year. The second team winning with quite literally the last kick of the game just to rub it in. Aside from sporting fixtures, what else is going on at Habs? Well, in my life, school trips have played an enormous and happy part. I don't know if any of you played rugby against Stowe School in your time, but for those of you who did, it might be quite difficult to separate the notions of sporting fixture and school trip. But in the occasional few moments of my school career when I haven't been sitting in a queue of traffic on the M40, I have found time to be whisked away around Europe by the languages department, the history department, the combined cadet force. It goes without saying that visits to destinations as diverse as Rome, Scottish lochs, or the depths of Russia have been eye-opening and unique. Parts of my education that I and my companions know we are immensely privileged to have received. But in many ways, the value of these excursions is not simply educational but social. Getting up and about, spending a week in a fantastic country with Habs pupils can only be a good thing for the history department. And we boys certainly appreciate the freedom and excitement that trips can generate too. This year has seen junior school boys travel to Agincourt to further their study of medieval history. The ever-popular annual ski trips continue in fine fashion in La Plagne, and in what was without doubt the most moving and even life-changing excursion I've ever been on, a history trip to the death camps and old Jewish quarters of southern Poland. But of course, you are old haberdashers, and I don't need to sell the virtues of our extracurricular enrichment program to you as if at an open day. Enrichment program. I know it may be a very ambitious school, but I think when you start using the same jargon as Ahmadinejad, things have perhaps gone a step too far. So I feel I should perhaps stray away from that side of school life. You may be happy to hear that the Habs spirit continues in the everyday business of things, in the lessons, at break times, in the myriad social interactions which occur along the webs of friendship which entangle every Habs boy. I don't know how many of you will have seen the Matt Lucas Awards on BBC One this Tuesday. It was a programme which I see was featured in last year's edition of the Old Boys Notes, and indeed was produced by Ashley Blake at OH. But it was very good to see two old boys of the school, Matt Lucas and David Baddiel, one of his guests on the show, reminiscing about their time at Habs, even if they were reminiscing about how swimming was the most depressing subject on the curriculum. It seems that there is a tacit yet unbreakable bond between all those who have attended the same school and been infected with the values and customs of its community, a bond which ignores differences in age. I'm sure that had Baddiel been replaced by one of my classmates on that couch, the conversation would have been much the same, although of course I am obliged to tell you that our swimming facilities are far more welcoming now and the lessons exceptional. Was that all right, Mr. Hamilton? In fact, having listened to Mr. Hanbidge's delightful and entertaining speech tonight, I see happily that Habs humour is not limited to the boys and that teachers could just as easily be sitting on that couch. Teachers play just as much a part in Habs boy culture as the Habs boys. And so, attending this dinner of the Old Haberdashers Association cannot but have reinforced those feelings of solidarity and community between those, whether pupils or staff, who left Habs decades ago and those whose turn is coming up next week. So I would like to thank you all for proving to me that there is one final thing that I shall not have to miss about my time at Habs, namely the friends. No matter what we do in the years after next Wednesday, no matter how dispersed we are, geographically or professionally, we will always remain Habs boys and there will always be a place for us. So thank you.
I think that was extremely inspirational and wish you luck next Wednesday. Well done. Gentlemen, the next toast is to the association. It's proposed by Mr. Rob Nothman, Now, not many of you will probably know him, but in this Olympic year and in all his working life, Rob has been a sports commentator. Now I would like you to listen to, because we might get something in July and August, and I'm looking forward to it, Rob. So please listen to him attentively.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, or Sir, as you will always be, having taught me brilliantly German 30 years ago. Master of the company, honoured guests, gentlemen. As a humble BBC sports reporter, this evening my cup overfloweth. An Olympic Games in London is just 70 days away. England's cricketers are the #1 test side in the world. My son's football team, the Finchley Pirates, are champions of the North Middlesex Under-10 Sunday League. And now, as an old boy of limited academic ability and renown, here I am delivering a speech to the esteemed Old Haberdashers Association. In the words of P.G. Wodehouse, this is like going to heaven without all the bother and expense of dying. This is a far more glittering occasion than the sorts of dinners that I'm used to addressing. A couple of months ago, I was at the British Amnesiacs Convention. They said that they couldn't remember a better speaker. Boom, boom. And last week, I was at the National Hemorrhoid Society dinner. Actually, it wasn't a dinner so much as a stand-up buffet. But we will leave those jokes to one side. While many of my contemporaries at Habs have spent the last 30 years as leading lights in their professions or in industry or science, I've been working at my hobby. Subsidised by your very generous licence fees, I've watched the lighting of the Olympic flame, endured England's continuing mediocrity in World Cups, strode the emerald green fairways of Augusta, marvelled at a Tendulkar cover drive or a warm googly, and mixed with the glitterati at Royal Ascot. My classmates, some 40 years ago, will tell you of a pale, unremarkable fellow who came alive at break times, when during playground football he would not only participate, but commentate at the same time. A continuous, irritating, high-pitched whine. Think Rebecca Brooks. For reasons neither of my parents is able to fathom, a career in sports commentary was what I sought. And it was always radio commentary. A, because I had a perfect face for radio, and B, because the pictures on radio are so much better. We were one of the last generations who harnessed the power of their imagination. How exciting it was. How impatient I was to start my career. So having secured my grades to read German and history at university, I took the controversial decision to fire higher education into touch and join the BBC to follow my dream. Soon after, I remember receiving a phone call from Mr. Hanbidge. "What are you doing?" he asked politely. How difficult it must have been for him to edit the expletive, "What the fiddlesticks are you doing?" But I reassured him. To coin a phrase of the time, this 18-year-old was not for turning. So join the BBC I did. And over the last 30 years, I've had a wonderful time. One of the great thrills of my job has been going around the world meeting some of the great sporting personalities. People like Frank Bruno, the boxer, for example, who I once asked, "Do you think Mike Tyson is invincible?" To which he replied, "I hope not. If I can't see him, I'll never beat him." I said, "Frank, but when you lost to James Bone Crusher Smith, you did have a detached retina." He said, "Yeah, before that, a council flat." Over the last 12 years, I have been BBC Radio's man stationed behind the 18th green at the Open Golf Championship, interviewing the great and the good as they have finished their rounds. Messrs Palmer, Nicholas, Faldo, Ballesteros. And 2 years ago, I witnessed probably the cruelest question I have ever heard uttered by an interviewer. Tiger Woods had just finished his second round at the Open Championship at St Andrews. His career, of course, in the previous 12 months had unravelled as allegations about his private life had become all too apparent. And an American journalist piped up in the corner and asked him, "Tiger, have you ever stopped to think how good you would have been had you really been practicing all the times you told your wife you were?" Imagine answering that one. I had 3 very happy years working for one of the BBC's local stations, BBC Radio Bristol. It was at a time when Somerset cricket was in its pomp. Messrs Richards, Garner and Botham were terrorising other counties in the county championship. And I always enjoy the story told about Ian Botham. He was batting in a county championship match at Cardiff one day. He came out to bat. Glamorgan bowler came in and bowled him a lovely outswinger, first ball. Botham played at it, missed, went through to the wicket-keeper. Bowler went to his top of his run, came in again, another glorious outswinger. Botham plays at it, misses, through to the wicket-keeper. The bowler is exasperated. He comes down the pitch, looks at Botham and says, "It's red, it's round, it's made of leather, and you're supposed to hit it." In comes the bowler for the next delivery. With an imperious stride down the pitch, Botham swings his bat in a lordly manner and launches the ball over the sight screen, out of the ground for 6. Comes up the pitch, looks at the bowler and says, "You know what it looks like, now go and fetch it." Last month, I was at the Grand National at Aintree, and in the course of BBC Radio's coverage, we interviewed a man from Weatherby's, the organisation that regulates the naming of racehorses. And we asked him about those owners who might be keen to try and sneak a slightly dodgy name past Weatherby's, so that commentators, when they got very excited in the closing stages of races, would utter this particular name. And the leader of Weatherby's did say that a number of owners had tried this, but by and large they had been rumbled before any damage was done. Except for one owner, who registered his first horse with the name Damocles. He registered his second horse with the name Pericles. Weatherby's thought, "Aha, we have a classic scholar." Until he registered his third horse with the name Testicles. Broadcasters, of course, need to try and avoid those broadcasting gaffes, those moments when they really do put their foot in it. I was, in my time in local radio, one of the worst disc jockeys there has ever been. I was the gentleman who once said, "Best wishes to Mrs. Hutton from Taunton, who's 111 today." I'm sorry, who's ill today. And I remember, too, being sent down to Temple Meads railway station in Bristol to do a story about the toilet at Temple Meads that was celebrating, if toilets can indeed do such a thing, its 200th anniversary. And I thought that I would finish my particular report with the sound of the toilet flushing. So I placed my microphone in the bowl and flushed. Rushed back to the studio, having taken the precaution of recording it one other time, just in case the first one hadn't come out. Rushed back to the studio, got my piece ready. It was the last item on that evening's drive time show. And all I had time to do in the days of quarter-inch tape, when all recorded items, you could see them playing on a tape machine, was to put some coloured tape in between the two toilet flushes, which signified the end of the piece. The report was broadcast successfully, but as I said, it was the last item on that drive time show. And the next programme was played in off tape, off an adjoining machine. The problem was that the man playing in the tape played in the wrong machine. So what went out on air was the following. You're listening to BBC Radio Bristol. It's 6 o'clock, time now for the latest in our series about poverty in Bangladesh. Your presenter is John Anderson. Cue the sound of a toilet flush. But quick as a flash, the continuity announcer opened his microphone and said, "I'm sorry, John isn't quite ready for us." So, 10 weeks tomorrow, the biggest sporting event this country has ever seen will begin. Is it worth the investment of £9 billion? Depending on who you believe, that figure could be nearer 11 or 12 billion by the end. It's a question folk far cleverer than I will answer someday in the future. The problem with trying to answer the question, though, is you can't put a figure on the intangibles. When I was in Barcelona in 1992 and in Sydney in 2000, I witnessed a profound sense of pride felt by the overwhelming majority of the host country. A togetherness, a desire to show the world the jewels of their city and their country. Heaven knows how many youngsters were inspired by what they saw and what they experienced. These benefits are hard to measure. It's similar with our wonderful school. For all its academic excellence, it's the qualities Haberdashers imbues which can't be measured that are the most important. Not the academic, not what's on paper, but the development of character, of self-confidence, of nerve, of awareness, of poise, of self-assurance. These are not taught, they're passed on, almost by osmosis. One can but hope that the Olympics inspires in just such a way. Lord Coe is the man, of course, in the hot seat. 20 years ago, I remember walking into Lord's on the opening day of a test match. In those days, I was Test Match Special's roving reporter. I used to do the interviews at the lunchtime and tea time intervals. And who should I bump into walking in through the Grace Gates but Sebastian Coe? And we had a little bit of a chat as we made our way towards the pavilion. In those days, the BBC commentary box was situated at the top of the Lord's Pavilion. I showed the steward on the gate my pass and walked in. Sebastian Coe showed him his ticket, and the steward said, "I'm sorry, sir, you can't come in here. You've got a ticket for the Compton and Edrich stand. What you need to do is go out of the pavilion, turn left, walk past the Allen stand, go right the way along the Allen stand, you'll get to the tavern. Walk along the tavern, past the tavern bar on your right, you get to the Bicentenary Gate, which is on your right-hand side. On past that, keep going, through the Mound stand, right the way along the Mound stand, past the Lost Property Office on the right, you'll then get to the Compton and Edrich stand. It's right on the other side of the ground." Sebastian Coe fixed the steward with a rather icy stare and said, "Excuse me, but do you know who I am? I'm Sebastian Coe." To which the steward replied, "Well, you ought to get there pretty quickly then." Let me finish by paying tribute to the Old Haberdashers Association. This is the 114th annual dinner. My old maths master, Tony Bell, accused me once of what he described as a perturbing lack of accuracy. Well, with pleasing symmetry, give or take the odd year, it's virtually the same number of years since the first Olympic Games of modern times in Athens. May the association continue to lead the field and aim for the podium in all its worthy endeavours, and may it flourish in the spirit of friendliness and kindness so evident tonight for many years to come. Please be upstanding, all of you. The toast is the association. There we go.
Thank you very much, Rob. But before I introduce our president to you formally, I asked for a few anecdotes about him. There weren't many, save that some reason he walked from Siena to Rome. That's approximately 150 miles, in what was reputed to be a pair of lederhosen. Why? Was he inspired by Spini's The Pines of the Appian Way, and couldn't afford a Roman legionnaire's outfit? Perhaps he might tell us. Whilst organising the running order for tonight with John and Andrew Tarpey, Andrew, your organisational skills are still second to none. Gentlemen, a big round of applause for Andrew. I received a mail from John, and part of it, and I quote, said, please note, apologies for being behind the game. I couldn't understand why. I was a very slow second row forward, despite playing for Leicestershire under-19s. And I'm used to having to catch up at the next scrum. I always curse referees who play too much advantage, but I think that's probably right. And this is borne out by one of his former colleagues at Habs, who told me, I really like and admire John Corrall. He's a big man in every way, heart and soul, body and mind. Very good games player, cricket at under-19 and at county level, plus, as we know, rugby. JC is a serious musician, both listener and a player. In fact, a bit of a Rottweiler. Doesn't let go once he's committed to a cause or a principle. Some might say he's an iron hand in a mailed fist, but the John I know is much more a velvet hand in an iron fist. He's a big-hearted, a good and generous friend, and a great advocate for what's the best about haberdashers. The OHA has been fortunate to have had him as president. So without further ado, gentlemen, please listen attentively to your president, Mr. John Corrall.
Right, am I too loud? That's all right. Anyway, honoured guests, members and friends of the Old Haberdashers Association. Great to see you all here in this magnificent setting for which we are indebted to the Haberdashers Company. And a particular pleasure, therefore, to welcome three senior members of the company, Mark Powell and Mike Jeans, both of whom have been loyal and active supporters of the school and the OHA, and the current chairman of the Boys' School Committee and former school captain, Daniel Hochberg. We're very pleased also to welcome two headmasters of the school, Peter Hamilton and Keith Dawson, both of whom have played an important part in the school's development at critical stages in its history. And a bit more of that later. After Keith's inspired video link appearance last year, another example of the OHA being at the cutting edge of new technology, it's great to see you in person, Keith. My thanks must, of course, go to our speakers. They say you should never speak of an elder brother to a pupil. However, Luke has the remarkable distinction of being the second in his family to become school captain. His elder brother Oliver was school captain in my time, and an excellent school captain he was. I suspect the school tried everything to avoid appointing Luke, but ability will out, as you've heard this evening, and it comes as no surprise that he is a worthy successor to his brother. But interestingly and pleasingly, in a very different style. I worked with Frank Hanbidge very closely, and as you can imagine, very entertainingly, when he was head of sixth form and I was senior master. Roles somewhat reversed recently when he was my landlord and I was his tenant. I can never quite escape the haberdasher's net, as our neighbour turned out to be the grandmother of a boy we taught, and the Habs Finchley coach departed every morning from outside the front door of the block of flats at what I now realise, in retirement, is an ungodly hour. Rob Nothman was a member of an A-level, as he's mentioned, as he recalls, of an A-level German set I taught in 1982. They were all brilliant linguists and model pupils. Adam G., Frank's guest, was also a member of that set. Work was never handed in late and always impeccable. So pretty untypical for haberdashers, really. And that year group meets up informally 3 or 4 times a year at the Freemasons' Arms in Hampstead, organised by the ever-resourceful Dan Schaffer, and is a good example of how haberdashers often remain in touch and network outside any formal structure. I was delighted to meet up with Rob again at one of those meetings, and to find there a kindred spirit, find a man happily doing what he always wanted to do and being paid for it, something very similar to my own experience at Habs. On the other hand, a formal event such as this OHA dinner attracts all branches of the Habs community. We have here current members of staff and pupils, coincidentally, Matthew, Mark, Luke. Unfortunately, John Maguire couldn't make it. We have many retired members of staff, members of the Haberdashers Company, former pupils, some of whom are members, some guests of the OHA, parents of pupils, some of whom were pupils themselves, former pupils who attended Westbere Road and others from Elstree, past and present members of the sports clubs, some of whom are former pupils and some not. And this is how we think it should be. One old boy who is not here is Mr. David Godrich of Santa Maria in California. As senior master and now as president of the OHA, I have always been head of the complaints department, or as it is often euphemistically named, customer care. Nevertheless, I was surprised to receive a letter handwritten in elegant copperplate which starts, "Dear Mr. Corrall, I trust I have spelled your name correctly, as it is my interpretation of the headmaster's handwriting, who suggested I write to you. No, Mr. Godrich, you've not spelled my name correctly, though you can tell he is of the older generation, because he does not start his letter to a complete stranger with 'Hi, John.' With some of the obvious bitterness I was describing following my solitary detention at school, Mr. Godrich relates that his father, as a leaving present from the school on the 25th of July 1945, had paid life membership to what was then called the Haberdashers Old Boys Club. He even enclosed the original receipt for 3 guineas, signed by none other than Mr. Bill Crossman. He then goes on to say, for some unknown reason never explained to me, my membership was declared void, and I have not heard from the association for over 35 years. This seems a rather slow response time, even by OHA standards. Had Mr. Godrich committed murder, which had required him to be expelled from the association and to flee to California? This remains a mystery. but the wonders of modern technology, at least, allow us now to send him the electronic newsletter and the old boys' notes, and it is encouraging that he takes the trouble to re-engage with the school and the OHA, and I look forward to future correspondence. It was also good to see the great Bill Crossman's signature and to realise that deputy heads then, as now, spend a considerable amount of time on deadly routine clerical work. You may also have seen from my interview with Margaret Taylor in the old boys' notes that Tom Taylor was in fact a bit of a softie and that he did not like beating boys. He had no appetite for this, but fortunately Bill Crossman did. And like Peter Grimes, was often at his exercise. I like to think that in those days, as we always do now, there was that job interviews included a practical test, and that candidates for the deputy head's job at the school were asked to perform this task on a line of willing volunteers to ensure that the new man had the necessary skills for the job. One area where the OHA has been unambiguously successful is the rugby club. They go from strength to strength, and I think the first team has topped the league and been promoted in 4 successive seasons. And this year, we were champions of North West London Division 2. Next season they will be playing at a seriously high level in North West Division 1. We are, without question, the leading old boys team in the London area. The second 15 also has enjoyed great success, and it is good to know we field 2 very strong sides. In recognition of their outstanding achievements, I have this salver to present, but I know that you want to say something about the season in anticipation of that.
Gentlemen, it has been an outstanding season. I have seen quite a few games. Unfortunately, Seb Taylor, who is here tonight, his father has been to every single home and away game. Played 24, won 23, lost 1. Unfortunately, he's not here tonight. He's in Tucson in Arizona. But I'm sure he will be here in spirit. Seb, thank you for all you've done. Well done. Thank
you. So, in recognition of the 2 teams, I'd like to present this the silver salver to Seb. I had the privilege of working with 4 of the 5 post-war headmasters. The one exception, sadly, was Tom Taylor, for whom I have the greatest admiration for his vision and determination. We celebrated the move to Elstree at last year's dinner with Margaret as our guest of honour. In fact, I only met Tom once in retirement at a tea after Junior Commendation Day. Knowing that he loved all things German and had indeed studied in Germany, and was a philosopher and keen musician, I thought we could have a lively discussion about perhaps the dispute between Wagner and Nietzsche. No sooner had I embarked on questions about the late great opera Parsifal than Tom turned on his heels with amazing agility for a 70-year-old and headed straight for the newly arrived 22-year-old blonde German Assistentin, with whom he appeared not to be discussing Schopenhauer. As I say, Tom was interested in all things German. It is good to know that genius, in Nietzsche's words, is also human, all too human. And that brings me back to our 2 headmasters and my pleasure in seeing them both here. Although headmasters vary in style and approach, as is right and proper, Peter and Keith have in common that they both arrived at the school at a critical time in the school's history. In Keith's time, it was in the wake of the abolition of the direct grant and faced with some fairly antiquated buildings and a threat to the assisted places scheme. More recently, during Peter's time, the school urgently needs resources to develop its facilities in order to remain one of the very best schools in the country, and most importantly, to enable bright boys from modest backgrounds to attend our great school. Both headmasters have devoted considerable time to raise funds to ensure the future of the school, and at the OHA we can be proud that the anonymous benefactor who, through his agent Mr. Selden, funded an ongoing building programme, was a loyal member of the OHA and, incidentally, a keen rugby player. Without his support, the school would not enjoy many of its finest facilities, and there are many other members of the OHA, loyal members of the OHA, who have contributed generously subsequent to that. My own angle on this in retirement is to be grateful that I had the best of jobs in the best of schools. As I came from a modest working class background where both of my parents had left school by the age of 14, I could see in my own case the power of education and the opportunities it created. I was fortunate that I got to grammar school, and a very good one at that, but that is not always an easy route these days. One ambition for Habs must be to provide as many bursaries as possible so that boys of ability can enjoy the outstanding education we know that Habs offers. I hear that two new bursaries are to be awarded this coming year through the generosity of a parent. I don't apologise if this sounds a bit like Mr. Chips. I am a bit like Mr. Chips. But I do hope that at some point in the future on a Friday afternoon, and I was on first-year games for 31 years. It's a great way of ending the week, actually, first-year games on a Friday afternoon. Long may it continue. And I like to think that a first-year boy will be running out onto the fields at Elstree in his blue and white hooped shirt, thanks at least in part to my donation, given at a time I can spare it, or more gloomily, no longer need it. I hope that some of you will feel equally well disposed towards the school and offer something in a way that suits you, towards an aspect of the school which is dear to your heart. It is, after all, for the benefit of the pupils, not the governors, not the headmaster, though they would be mighty pleased, but it is for the boys, and any contribution you feel able to make will make a difference. It's also worth mentioning at a gathering like this that the school is always looking for work experience opportunities. And so if you can take a boy on board for a week or two's work experience, the school will be very pleased to hear from you. Finally, although this has already been said, it is worth repeating. I would like to thank on your behalf Andrew Tarpey, another former school captain, who organises the dinner with such charm and efficiency, as well as organising many other OHA events. He manages to do this from his home buried in the heart of the Cotswolds, where I hear he is not only an active member of the Chipping Norton set and personal advisor to Rebecca Brooks, but also holds down a senior position with Jaguar Land Rover, and that last bit is in fact true. And how he manages all of this is one of the unexplained miracles of the OHA. Thanks also to Tony Alexander, who's performed the role of MC this evening in such style and with such good humour. This 2-year presidency of the OHA has given me the chance to keep in touch with many in the Habs community and to make some new acquaintances. I hope the OHA, through occasions such as this dinner here, will continue to be a unifying force and a rallying point for former pupils and friends of the school, and that relations with the school will get ever stronger. And so, to round off the formal part of the evening, I propose a toast to the OHA and the school. Long may they flourish. OHA and the school.
Well done, you.
Gentlemen, that concludes our dinner this evening, but I would like to remind you there is a cash bar outside, and through the auspices of Mr. Andrew Tarpey again, he's arranged late night opening at the Bishop's Finger down at the end of the road. Last orders 23:30. Gentlemen, thank you very much.